All right, we are live, ladies and gentlemen of the Action Fantasy Book Club. Welcome to the very first of what I hope will be many live roundtable discussion hangout things that we have not yet come up with a name for, with all of us authors of the Action Fantasy Book Club. I'm Andy Peliquin. I guess I've drawn the short straw and I'm your host for the month, or I'm just talking randomly because I'm the loudest. But you know what? We're not here to talk only about me or even about me. So let's get to meet the other panelists of the Hangout. Russell, why don't you start off by telling us something about you, anything?
Sure. Hi, I'm Russell Nolte. I'm a USA Today best-selling fantasy author, and I write action fantasy and a whole bunch of other genres as well.
Very cool. Starting off with the official titles, USA Today bestseller. All right, I see what this is. Eric, what about you? Who is Eric Knight?
Well, I don't have any fancy titles. I just write books. I might have been a bestseller at some point, but I don't know. I can't match up to Russell, though. I have 17 books in 3 interlinked fantasy series, and then a new series, of which book 1 is a book I'll be giving away. That's called Badger Company. And so I'm looking forward to just seeing where this journey takes us.
Very cool. Now, on a scale of 1 to 10, Eric, how much action do you say your books have?
6. I'd say a 6. They've got a fair amount of action in them. Frankly, I mostly my favorite part is character interaction, but I know people are there for action. So I believe in having action frequently and often, but there's a lot of other stuff in there as well.
Very cool. J.A., tell us about the J and the A.
Well, the J's for Janice, which I never remember to tell people. And I write epic fantasy, not a USA Today bestseller, as far as I know. But I was pestering Andy before this because if I had to rate my books, I have 7 books in the intertwined universe. And my main characters are these they do magic, but they're mostly like storytellers and librarians. And so the action level, if we're talking fighting and wars, is a 2 out of 10. I do think there's other kinds of action. I don't think they're boring, but people don't come to mind for the great martial arts scenes or something like that. We come for it's books. It's really books and libraries, and then more books.
So lots of book-related action in these action fantasy books. I love it.
Yeah.
Throwing books at each other, sort of how very Pratchett-esque, I would say, the Unseen University. Eileen, tell us a little bit about you and your action.
I just wanted to say, even though Jenna says her action is a 2 from the reviews I see from her readers, maybe we'd all dispute that. So, there's quite a lot that happens in her books that people love. I'd say, I don't know if mine would be an 8. I've got no idea. I love action. I thrive on action. I think my prequels are there's a lot more character stuff, as Eric was saying, than in my main series, which is Riders of Fire. And I have a prequel series called Riders of Fire Dragon Masters. And then I have a whole number of other books out. I think I've got about 20 books out, but I always lose count. So as you can see, mine are all about the dragons. All sorts of dragon action in my books. So, and all sorts of rider and dragon action. So
you can't have dragons and not have action. The sheer soaring, dropping, banking, turning, that is action. Whether they actually, swing a sword, it's just that it is by nature action. And that's what I think makes dragons such a fun thing to write and read about, is because there is just these moments of breathless awesomeness as you're soaring, as you're, all that kind of stuff. And I love that.
So I think there's also a lot of action. I have writers who do dragon acrobatics. There's one book that is an entire war from cover to cover. It's called Dragon War. The war starts, the war ends, and my readers were like, how did you keep track of all the characters? Because I have lots of points of view in my stories. And in that book, that's book number 5 in the Riders of Fire series. So I'm bringing together all the 50 point of view characters that I've had up to that point, and I give them all places in the war, and everyone's, how do you keep track of where they are? And somehow it happens sort of seamlessly, but with a big Excel sheet and
Very cool.
me knowing where everybody is. But yeah, so there's a lot of action in most of my books. I love action. I'm an adrenaline junkie, so that's sort of what happens in my books.
Very cool. And, last but definitely not least, Mr. Zangari, tell us a little about you and the action in your stories.
So I am the younger half of the father-son co-author team. My father's Dan, and I'm Robert. And our fantasy series has quite a bit of action. I would say about an 8, like Eileen's. I'm a martial artist, and so I like to bring a lot of my martial arts experience into my books. And I'll often do some choreography before, if I have a particular scene, and I'll just kind of be working on, okay, does this work? And I see the fight scenes going on in my head. And so I tend to do a lot of that when at least when we're getting to the climax of whichever story I'm writing. So if I don't have a lot of action sequences, I don't tend to be super happy with the story. But you'll tend to see, yes, it's just like, okay, politics is interesting. I do like, the action that comes with, research and stuff. So like we do have certain things where in A Prince's Errand where Iltar's line is mostly about research, and there's not really action until the end, but there's still a lot of action-like things going on. So like Janice's stuff too. But yeah, I would say about an 8 probably. And I love action. It's one of the things that draws me to the fantasy genre. So yeah.
On this we agree. I mean, I would probably have to say that some of my books, especially like the Darkblade book, is like 10 out of 10. Like as much action as I can pack into that thing, I do, because that's really what makes it fun. But I love that we've talked a little bit about this, but I want to dive a little deeper into what defines action. So as I was saying, lots of violence, right? You have a half demon assassin, he's gonna kill. You've got a military guy, he's gonna military stuff. Dragons with Eileen, right? Lots of flying around. But for what Robert was saying about the action not necessarily being blood and guts or these things, you can keep things moving forward. I guess the question is, how can you write this kind of action without there being all the kind of violent stuff? And that's a lot of fun to talk about. So Robert and Janice, you guys are kind of the experts on the not violent action. Tell us a little bit about that.
I was thinking about this before we got on to see if I could come up with an intelligent answer. I'm not sure if I did, but I do feel like what drives us towards this idea of action is this idea of something that our characters have something valuable that's at stake, right? Whether it's they're on a quest, and if they don't find the sword, they can't stop the whatever, right? But there's this sense that we have something of value that's in danger, and it can be very easily put into danger through violence, right? That something can come and kill or steal or whatever. But I do think it can also be a lot more subtle. I mean, we all live our lives with the things that we love around us, can be in great danger sometimes, and that is just like high anxiety levels, right? And so I think I think what makes action work, whether it's like a subtle, like more of a quest or interrelationship tension or a dragon fight, is that we're all scared that this thing that we value or that the characters value is about to be destroyed, lost, stolen, or corrupted, or something, like we're going to lose something. So that's, I think, where my concept of action comes from, this fear that we're going to lose something.
Do you make your characters, sorry, I have to ask this. Do you make your characters like run or gallop or whatever, like to build up the urgency, even if it's like, the sun's about to set and something bad is going to happen. Oh my God, I got to run there. And then you have the action there. Or is it just like, here's the anxiety. I'm going to let you marinate in that a little bit to ratchet it up as we walk slowly.
So there's a decent amount of marinating, and there's a decent amount of like a group going somewhere, but there's like a wagon involved, right? Nothing's moving fast, but there's like the clues of like no one's seen this dragon that we know about that we haven't seen in a long time. It suddenly disappeared, and then they find this dragon skin. Like there's only one dragon that anyone knows about, but then they find a dragon skin, and someone's like, so snakes lose their skin when they're growing. So there's this idea of like there's tension ratcheting up, but we don't get to actually see the big dragon. Nobody ran until we saw, the big dragon did come and fly. Most of my action happens when a dragon shows up, actually, but there was the chapter with the dragon. But yeah, there's not a ton of running, actually. I don't think my readers find my books boring. I realize they're coming across as like slow and a little plodding, but
no, I think it's good because that whole, I mean, honestly, like you said, the only reason my character spends half his time or half her time running around is because something bad is going to happen to someone else somewhere else. And using distance, which is absolutely, you cannot change it. If there is 100 miles between you and the enemy, it's going to take you 100 miles worth of time to cross that. So if all of a sudden something bad's going to happen sooner, okay, we have stakes. And that I think is a great way to just like ratchet up the tension. Robert, what about you? How do you approach the let's say violent or dynamic action scenes, but really still make them engaging and heart pounding and thrilling?
So I kind of do a lot like what Janice does too. And one thing I focus on is the anticipation of action happening and just kind of the more suspense, I guess. And that suspense can lead to the same emotional beats as action. And of course, having them discover something, even if you're just in a library. There's a scene in A Prince's Errand where they're in a library, and it's this, oh, we found something. And you can have plenty of action beats and have the characters, going through the, showing these kinetic appeals that it feels action oriented. You can focus in on like, what is internally happening, for the POV character. Is their heart racing? Is there anxiety that's coming up? Or are they afraid of what they might find? Maybe it validates the theory, but there's a little bit of, fear, I guess you could say, that you could put in there to make it like a fight scene. Because with a fight scene, you're kind of at the climax of action, and it's either it ends by them getting separated or somebody dies. And so I think all the stuff that happens in a non-fight scene, all those things lend to action by either foreshadowing or further expounding the risks and the stakes of what's really going on, what the characters are fighting for, whether that be politically fighting for or physically fighting for, or even just emotionally struggling to grapple with. So I kind of think when it comes to the non, I guess we could say violence scenes, it really is about letting the readers and the characters experience that anticipation, and that just kind of gets the heart rate going a little bit,
ratcheting up that anxiety to an 11, making you know it's coming. I will have to say, one of the best episodes of the Game of Thrones TV show was the night before the Battle of Winterfell, because you knew it was coming. You felt the dread everywhere. The entire episode, everyone was terrified of what was to come. And so much happened, and none of it was violent, none of it was loud. It was all these quiet moments, but you felt it coming. And that, for me, I think that was one of probably the best episode of the entire show in many ways. was that one, and they ruined it the next one. We're not going to get into that. This is not that podcast.
I gotta ask, because like, okay, so you have 100,000 word book, and you are at 10 of 10. How many thousands of words do you dedicate to action in a 10 of 10 book?
It's adorable how you think that 100,000 words is something I'm capable of.
Oh, he does 250. He does
50,000 words.
350. That's it.
Yeah, right now, the book I'm finishing today, Come Hell or High Water, is 425,000 words. Of that, I know it is bad. My brain is sludge right now. But of that, I would say about half would be dedicated to some sort of action or adrenaline thing, whether it's, oh my God, everybody we know is going to die, we need to run there. So in this book, one of the most, like, there's a whole chapter dedicated to them trying to get down a cliff in time. They know that they need to go somewhere to stop people from being murdered. They've got to get down this cliff. They have no idea how to do it. Oh, someone has a rope. We got to tie the rope. We got to, someone's too weak to climb down. How are we going to untie this rope? Fine, my half-demon assassin is going to jump into a pool of water, which is about this deep, and shatter all the bones in his body. But this is all the kind of stuff that comes. And then we're still running.
Just send the dragon.
I'm saving dragons for another series.
Okay, so 10 of 10 is half. Janice, how many thousand out of 100,000 words? How many thousands of words, or what percentage are dedicated to action in the way that? Because I'm starting to doubt whether I write action fantasy in the way that Andy is thinking of.
So I would say maybe 5 to 10,000 words. There's maybe a scene or two early in the book that's like a quick action thing, and then at the end, so my last series, the girl was really good. She was really good at speaking. So really the climax was a speech. Again, that doesn't sound very exciting. Yeah, there it is right there. But it was a save the world kind of speech. And then a dragon does show up, and there is like a big fire and a fight. But yeah, I would say 5 to 10,000 maybe out of 100,000 words would be like any kind of anything you could call fighting, racing, chasing, anything like that.
Because like I feel like I write very actiony books, and like I'm much closer to Janice's thing. Like I actually like the action scene. I'm like, can I just get past this so I can set up the next tension for the next thing they have to do? And then they spend 10,000. Like I come from movies and TV, and so like the action, even in the most action heavy movie, the action is like the climax of 10 minutes of building to that moment, and then releasing that tension, and then building back up to it over and over and over and over and over. So like
so it's cyclical.
So like I think I'm much closer to probably 10%, but it's like there's one scene and one or two scenes every 10,000 words like ends. It's like one or two scenes that are actiony, and the rest of it is like, what are all of the set pieces that need to be moved around in order to like get that payoff? Like whether it's like beating the minor villain, or like getting the piece of the thing, or like whatever that is to like move them forward. So yeah, it's very interesting to have like 50% and 10. And I'm like, wow, I always thought my books were way action heavy, but like
I think my books they read like a John Wick movie watches, in the sense that John Wick violence is sort of what gets him from point A to point B, right? The violence and the action is what leads him to the quieter moments, as opposed to, I'm gonna say, I can't even think of a movie, or say Top Gun. Top Gun, the new one, Maverick, you pack all this action into that end scene, and there's some action here and there, but it's really this ramping up to this thing. Whereas John Wick, it's just like escalating stages of violence. And that's kind of, and it's not done gratuitously, or I try not to do it gratuitously. Every single one of these violent scenes is done for the sake of developing his character or the characters around him, or showcasing, sometimes it's just like, well, let's make things hard and kill somebody he loves or cares for, or put them in danger to get them. Because, I don't want to have chapters of Lord of the Rings level travel where it's 20 chapters of them, striding along. So it's like, okay, I want to get him from here to there. Someone's in danger, we gallop. That's kind of my approach to a lot of these things.
Did you know you could just say the next chapter is like they get there? Like,
but that's the thing is, I don't believe that. I don't believe that people can travel for days without a meaningful conversation that contributes to the story at large. Like, it is so rare for me to have something like that. Like, I've done it in this book where there's a couple of points where the characters are traveling for a day and a night, maybe, and it's like everyone's too tired to talk. Fine, I'll buy that. But it's like, we've been enemies for so long. We've been friends for so long. We're falling in love. We hate each other and want to murder each other. None of this can happen over the course of a week. It's like, you can kind of hold off. I'm just thinking about like my wife. If I'm mad at her, I can't go for a day and a night without telling her I'm mad at her. If I'm feeling romantic, I'm gonna plan something that night. It's not gonna be like days later. So I
you wait till the evening.
She works, I work. That's kind of the way it goes. But yeah, for me, the idea of weeks going by and no action happening, no meaningful conversations, no quiet moments, no deep internal brooding of the character who's not great at communication, all of that, it's just, I don't have that capacity to do that. But some people work for some people. Eric, you've been awfully quiet this whole time. I know that your books have a lot of my kind of action, lots of fighting, lots of going, lots of doing. What's your favorite kind of action to write?
Well, like you said, I think the thing is, one of the problems I have is that you watch some movies where it's just action, 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 and it never develops the characters. So I don't really care about the action. So I feel like there needs to be a certain amount of build up of the characters so that when the action happens, we care about them. And so a lot of the work done in the book is like Russell or someone said, is about moving the set pieces around and getting them into the right place to where when it can happen, it has the maximum emotional impact, and we can move through this. But my attention span, I think I probably spend too much time on Reddit. I have the attention span of a gnat. So like, if I have to read a book where nothing happens for 30 pages, I'm out. So I can't do that. Like, there has to be, like, when we first started talking about this, I just automatically went to like, well, how many scenes are violent in your book? And I don't really like violence that much. It's a necessary part of it. I try not to get too gory or anything, but there needs to be things happening all the time. So there is always action. It's just that a lot of it, like, it could be two kids, 10-year-old girls that are just running around the palace getting in trouble. And there's action going on all the time, because it just drives me crazy if you try to, something that will just put me to sleep. I mean, Lord of the Rings is one of my all-time favorites, but I read it when I was a lot younger and I had a longer attention span. Now I'm not going to read it because I'd be like, well, how come nothing's happening? Move. So I believe in making the story move all the time, and I love the big payoffs. Like, I don't want to read 1,000 pages for a 10-page climax at the end. I mean, my most recent series in book 6, as it concluded, fully the last third of the book is just the final climactic, and it's just bang, 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 bang. Well, you have so many different villains that have to be dealt with and storylines that have to be wrapped up. And so a huge payoff, and I love that. And that's something like Stephen Donaldson does really well in his books. Like, you get big payoffs over and over again, but he never leaves you just, oh, well, we're going to plod along and not much happens for a week. Like you said, something's going to happen. Something has to happen in that, because I want to keep the story moving. Like, I don't want to get bogged down in too much description or endless conversations that don't go anywhere. I want to keep it going, keep going. But then, here's the fight, and it's time to do the fight. And as a person who has avoided physical conflict his whole life and doesn't want to learn martial arts or anything, it's the part that I like the least. But I think they come out well. It's not my favorite thing to do.
Me too. I'm always like, I guess I got to do the action scene now. There's no more tension to build. But like you said something about the plodding along, and like, So for the book that I'm doing this year is the first 15,000 words are this woman going about the last day of her life until she gets sacrificed to a dragon. And like the whole first 15,000 words is like her meeting the mayor and all of the tension and like her having to go to a party where they're celebrating her death. And like there's literally like her having to say goodbye to like the love of her life that never was able to be consummated, her talking to the other sacrifices, and like her having to go to the school that she went to and like answer questions about like all of these things. And like to me that's like very action heavy because like every scene is layered with like, wow, all of these people are just real excited for me to die, and like it's just like how horrible this is every moment. But like it shows roughly like the entire sequence of that event as like she's going up, and like some scenes just like she walks up this mountain and she's like dealing with her. And to me there's like internal action and external action, and like I'm very into every scene, every beat having like internal action that needs to be done, or like she has to go and talk to this person or do this or like get all of these people in a room together. And every one of those things are full of action. But like Lord of the Rings is just like often 30 pages about like what cheese they ate that day. And like then it goes on to like there's a moment in The Hobbit that's like, all the dwarves get like taken away under this like, and then it just cuts the next thing to like 6 months later, and I'm like what? You just spent 4 chapters on cheese, and like now you cut through like all of the tension of what happens then. So like sometimes people use action as like a crutch to just be like, well, nothing's happened, I guess bomb now.
So I think there's a correlation between conflict, tension, and action. Or I think we can define action in various ways. So I think if you've got characters who have conflicting interests, it could be a banquet scene, but they're all sitting there waiting to see who is going to be poisoned, or the reader knows somebody's going to be poisoned, or there's an assassin in the crowd, and that brings its own sort of tension. So I think when we're defining action, so okay, Andy, action equals violence. Hats off to you. But in my books, it's not always about violence. I did have an editor once say, don't your characters ever walk anywhere? And I was like, yeah, when they're in a romantic quiet scene, sure, they meander, and so I always have people striding and stalking and racing and rushing, and but not all the time, only when it's appropriate. And I think it's the level of tension that you bring into your books through, now when I say action in this term, through what people are doing. I mean, action is what people are doing, right? When you look at an action. But when we say action, we're meaning action with high levels of tension, with high stakes, with characters we care about. And we're on an emotional journey where we're, when you're reading, I'm one of those readers who, when the character's heart pounds, my heart pounds. When they get a dry mouth, I get a dry mouth. So I'm a really, I usually have an empathetic reader, or whatever it's called. Yeah, no, there's a better empathic reader. There's a better word that I used to use for it, but I just can't think of it at the moment. And so I write with that sort of emotion right from the beginning of the scene through my book, because I know that emotion and the emotional roller coaster is what's going to carry my readers. And they love it. Like in Azara, which is book 1 in Riders of Fire, the first line is, the scrape of a sword sliding from its scabbard cut through the market square, right? So there's a fight scene. It's not a high stakes fight scene. It ends up being a fun one, but there's a bit of humiliation involved in it. And suddenly you've got all these things rolling with the character. In the next scene, she's in a real fight scene, and she's already met a dragon, when dragons are banned in her village, and it's a crime. You get imprisoned for even liking dragons, basically, in her village. So, the stakes are already there. But then there's a whole lot of training scenes. During the training scenes, I consider those action. There are people fighting, there's conflict, there's prejudice, there's all that sort of stuff. So it's not always just about violence. Yeah, there is a bit of that as well. But, you know, there's a lot of different things that make up action. So I think it's about your character's internal journey, about the level of emotion and the tension. As Russell said, that sounds like really good action writing to me. Oh, I'm going to die. And all these people, you know, and having her meeting all those people ratchets up the tension to when you finally get to that scene. So I guess it does depend how you define that action. But yeah, and I know your scenes. When I've read the first book of yours that I read, Andy, I just remember thinking, oh my goodness, we write in such a similar manner. Like everything was like bang, 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 bang. And I was like, yeah, I love this books. What's that?
It's very frenetic.
Yeah, yeah.
I think Eric,
I've romance too. So you've got that building in the background, and romance has its own sort of tension and action as well, you know, and conflicts and all sorts of things happening within there. What were you going to say, Janice?
I just think that Eric brought up the good point that whatever is happening, the story needs to keep moving. And I think it can happen, but we can have nothing violent happening and the story can stall and be boring. We can have a ton of violence and fighting and we don't care and the story stalls. And so I think there's this, like Russell was saying too, there's this internal tension and just, yeah, whatever's happening, whether it's external, internal, all these things, it has to be moving the story along. If your story's not moving, that's when we lose. That's when I bail on a book anyway, when I just feel like I'm reading about cheese and I don't care. And so there's too many other distractions and off I go.
I think
you're reading about violent cheese and you don't care because nothing matters.
Killer cheese. I was going to say, I think external tension only matters as it pertains to internal tension of the character, you know, the point of view character or the characters that you're emotionally invested in. It could be like I've read battle scenes where I don't care. I don't care anything. It's just, yeah, okay, let's get through this. I'm not engaged at all because there's no stakes. There's no emotional damage to the main character. Now, Janice's books, with a word, you can destroy the main character and you're like, oh my God, I'm just left reeling, right? So you can have these moments of intense action that don't involve any violence. And like you were saying, Janice, the most violent book, if there's no consequence, there's no connection to the main character, it means nothing. And that was something I learned from the good Sir Phil Tucker, was make everything directly linked to the character in some way. You want him or her to feel it. Put someone that they care about in danger. You don't have anybody that they care about to put them in danger. Make them care about someone, right? Great example, you know, for example, a military series, right? Guy and his company, they're at the back, they're the rear guard. Great. Someone brings him a cup of water and is super nice to him the night before. That person's in the front line. There is this emotional connection to someone in danger, right? It's very easy. And I don't mean it to do it cheaply. It's sort of a trick that we as writers do. We manufacture all of these emotional connections. Anyways, it's very easy to do that.
Yeah, my proofreader always says, I hate when I fall in love with someone because you're almost always going to kill them. And I was like, that is an accurate statement. Like, I can't kill somebody until you love them. And if I need somebody to die, that's a good thing to spend a book leading up to that person's 100%. Death.
And the more you come to care about them, the more that death hurts. And that's really what makes violence and action so impactful, is that you've spent all this time making the reader care about someone, whether it's the love interest, whether it's the best friend, whether it's the random person on the street that you just kind of met but really immediately connected with. You put them in danger, whether they run or they stride or they swing a sword or they throw a book. There's some sort of stake to give it action. And I think that really is what makes it good. Now, I have a question for you guys. This is very much a craft question. What's your approach? Do you have like a formula for writing these kind of action scenes? When you sit down to write, I know a lot of what we do is very unconscious or subconscious or instinctive, but do you have sort of this formula or this process to write these action scenes?
I have one thing I do. Every scene I write, I think, who has the most to lose in this scene? And I make it their point of view. And that's why my points of view change so often. So if I'm writing something, I'm like, who's got the greatest emotional investment? Who could lose most? And then it's them that gets to be on the page. So that helps ratchet up the tension. Yeah.
Very cool.
That is the
Robert,
advantage of
a lot of
multiple
people
point of views. Is you just sort of like, okay, this is boring. Like this character has now done the thing. Who's got the most thing now? And then you just move it to that character.
Well, I don't know. I don't get to the boring phase. I'm like, oh, okay, there's this scene, right? Who's going to lose out in this book? Let's go, bang.
Right, but then at the end of that scene, it's like, okay, now that's done. Like, who has the next? I do like that very much about like multiple point of view characters and portals, because then you.
I don't think I'm able. Yeah, I have portals in my book too. So you guys talking about, oh, you got to travel six weeks to get somewhere. I'm like, take a dragon, put on the ring, off you go. But not always. There's only 2 portal rings in my book, and one of them's lost. So yeah, that doesn't happen that often. But I think also it is about the stakes. I think. Yeah. Anyway, I've said enough. So we're talking about formulas for action scenes. We know that Robert dances around his lounge doing his moves.
So I think one of the things I try to do is, so my writing mentor, David Farland, came up with something called the KAV cycle, where you're putting different emotional appeals. So kinesthetic, like action. The A stands for auditory, and then B for visual. So I try to do as many of those cycles in an action sequence, because that entire sequence actually keeps people hooked into the story. But what I also try to do, because usually when I'm writing an action scene, it's very focused on the kinesthetic, that K appeal, and what the characters are feeling, what they're doing, what's going on, maybe some visuals because they're seeing what their opponent's doing. But I also try to get enough auditory appeals. And for me, that's one of my weak points as a writer. So I tend to think, okay, what are they hearing at this moment? And try to interject those little appeals. So as far as a craft perspective, that's kind of one of the things I make sure I balance other emotional appeals in my writing, so that someone that maybe is not very visual oriented is still invested into the scene.
That's interesting. Eric?
Yeah, I get smell and taste as well. I make sure there's smell and taste in my scenes. Yeah.
So I have no martial arts background or anything like that. I took a kung fu class once, and it hurt. People kept hitting me. I did not like it. So I don't really research. What I try to do is just visualize it, and in my mind, I'm trying to find what looks cool. Yeah, you could nitpick it and say, well, a real fight wouldn't happen that way. I don't care about that. This is fantasy. I want it to look cool, and I love swashbuckler moves. Stuff like that is my favorite, because especially like the old like Three Musketeers kind of swashbuckler thing. Like, they're not really bloody. They have these big fights, but it's a lot of cool moves, and some guy gets stabbed and goes down. So I really love that kind of thing, but I really spend a lot of time like looking at it in my mind, because I read other people's action scenes, and it's like, that doesn't work. That guy was over there, and now he's here, and he's suddenly on a horse. Like, you can't get up there. Like, so I really like to spend time on, just how is this going to look? Like, to me, like one of the ultimate action, like my idea of is in The Hobbit, is when Legolas is jumping from barrel to barrel as they're washing down the river, and like shooting orcs and all that. Like, it looks so cool. And that's what I'm after. Like, I'm not really trying to make you feel like, oh my God, his head just exploded. I'm more interested in like, oh, that looked really neat. And to try to make it, just picture it like, what would be the neatest thing they could do right here? Could they slide through the villain, underneath the villain's legs, and stab him on the way through, or what? So
it's interesting, because I do my process is there literally any other way that they can get through this without fighting? Like, no? Well, like, I guess they have to fight. How can I make this as quick as painless as possible for me to write the actual things so they can go and do tension things. But like to me, action, the actual like part of the fight is like the absolute last line of defense before they have to be, and the only thing that they can do is like fight. It's the only option left to like move the story forward.
Interesting. Janice, you're up.
I'm with Russell. My only process involves like weeping and gnashing of teeth that I'm at this point. And I only have a single point of view in any of my books, and they have never yet been any kind of fighter. Like they're just not even competent at it at all. My last series, a long time, the love interest is a soldier, and so he's constantly trying to like, she's always putting herself in danger. So he's constantly trying to like at least teach her how to hold a knife or to do something that she can protect herself with, and she's terrible at it. And so a lot of my fight scenes are from this point of view of the character who doesn't. They're trying to help with the fighting, right? But like they're kind of like they're not the spearhead of whatever's happening. And so a lot of my fight scenes, I think they end up feeling like disjointed, the way a person who doesn't really know how to fight would just be like, whoa, like, so, which is actually helpful because I know if I really tried to make it cool and from the fighter's point of view, everyone reading it would be like, you have no idea what you're talking about. So it's very easy to stand at the side of the person who's like, I don't know, that looks super cool, and like, yay, we're winning, or oh, we just got captured. But yeah, but the actual fighting ends up not being particularly defined because it's all filtered through the view of the non-fighter in the group.
I like that.
Okay,
It's a very unique way of doing it.
Yeah, I like that.
Yep. That is very cool. But as you were talking, I was like, this is what I do. I've forgotten. I have a friend who's a forensics policeman. He's also a kickboxer, a motorbike racer, an archer. And what else does he do? Swords. He does all this sort of stuff. So I often call him and go, hey, what would happen? Or what would happen with this? Or how would a body look? Or if you were doing this move? Or I've got one point where someone's training with a bow, and the person training them realizes, what their dominant eye and their dominant, and their dominant arm is. And so they go through all of that when they're doing archery. So he looks at a bit of my stuff. And so that makes it really fun in terms of getting it. Oh, and he does jujitsu as well. So, so he's an amazing resource to have around in the background, helping me make sure my fight scenes are authentic. So yeah, there's that sort of thing as well, I suppose, how you can approach it.
Very cool. Something that I learned in my year and a half of practicing martial arts and from researching and talking with like professional fencers, swordsmen, is that fights are very short. Yeah. You never get that. So the only way, like especially with my character who's vastly overpowered, the only way that any fight scene will ever drag on is if he can't fight, or as if there's like 100 people going up against him. And again, that's where you get the threat to the people he cares about. Like in this entire book, he's like, okay, if I was fighting this battle alone, I'd draw this magic sword, rip through everybody, and it would be done. But there's someone right next to me that I can't accidentally kill. So now I've got to fight the more human way. But that's kind of like these, and that's, I think, why my action ends up being so dynamic or sometimes so frenetic, is that you can't have, swords clashing, sort of like very Princess Bride or Three Musketeers. Yeah. That style of fighting is a ton of fun, but it's not realistic for the story. So you get that really short, sharp, ugly style of fighting. And so you just got to keep throwing more and more people at them.
The one thing that I will say that the only thing I haven't heard is like the one thing that I try to do is play with time. Like, because that is the one thing you could do in a fight that is harder to do outside of a fight, is slow things down and speed things up and and like take those moments to like stretch something out. Because you're right, like once it gets time to the fight, it's like, well, like this fight would be over in less than 30 seconds. So like that's the only strategy that I found, besides like the smell and the taste and the five senses one, that like I can use to make it more interesting for me is playing with time in that manner.
Yeah.
And when you're writing, there are moments that you want to draw out, and you create more tension, or like in romance circles, which this is not one of those, but they talk about, making that first kiss, really, drawing that out. So it's often like when people first meet each other, or when you're in the middle of battle and suddenly you stretch things out. So I love that technique, Crystal. Yeah.
Very cool. All right. We are basically out of time, but I have one last question for y'all, which I hope you're prepared for. What is one of the standout action fantasy books that you've read? I will give you a couple of seconds to think about it, so I'll go first. I've actually been reading this one. It's called The Demon Cycle by Peter Brett. It's starting with The Worded Man. I just discovered it. Literally, I bought the book a couple of months ago, and I've finished the 5-book series. And what I love about the way that this guy writes action is that the action is used to show character. There's plenty of fighting and all of that, but every action scene is done to develop the character. So in the training, it's all about showing, the character's determination or their cowardice, right? When they take a hit, or there's so much action in this series, but the way that he goes about using it to highlight the character traits or the differences or just the important things about the people. That for me is a huge thing that makes me really enjoy the series. All right, someone else go.
Okay, so if you want a book that has a lot of action but not a lot of fighting, I read. I really like I guess the best described as Gothic fantasy, and so all of my favorite books fall into that vein. And the book I think probably that y'all would enjoy is The Bone Witch by Rin Chapeko. If you know that series, it's so good. There's so much tension, and the end of the first book, once you figure out what's going on, is one of my favorite holy shit moments that I've ever had reading a book.
Very cool.
Well, one of my favorites is it's called Heroes Die, and it's by Matthew Woodring Stover. It came out about 15-20 years ago, and he clearly does know his martial arts, and his character is amazing. Kane, not because he's the biggest or the strongest, but really he's the most ruthless, and his fights are over very fast, and they're beautifully done. This is what it would look like. Somebody slips or makes one little mistake and it's over, and it's fast, and it's so visceral. The way it happens, it really puts you there. It's just amazing. And then there's several more books that he came out with afterwards, but that would be my take, and of course the original classic, the original Conan books by Robert E. Howard. The action is just brilliant. It goes bang, 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 and it's just over. And it's, again, incredibly violent and incredibly short. So
very cool.
I think for me, I do love Howard's Conan. But for recently, I guess I discovered Robert Jordan's Conan books, and in contrast to the Wheel of Time, those are actually very action-packed, and they move quickly. So they've been a lot of fun to read. But I think my all-time favorite action would have to be R.A. Salvatore's Drizzt series.
Oh hell yeah! You don't get better sword fights and all of that hard. Sebastian de Castell's sword fights are very Three Musketeers spectacular, but no one can beat when Drizzt and Entreri are going at each other. Just unmatchable fights.
Yep.
Eileen, Janice, what about you? What are some good action-packed books for you?
I was actually thinking, I don't tend to read really action-packed books, which I suppose isn't going to surprise anybody at this point. There's two that I thought of. Barbara Kloss is an indie author, and her Gods of Men series. There's multiple point of views, and one of them is the Prince, Captain of the Guard. So there's some fighting. He has sort of his group of men, and they're sent out on task. So there's some fighting and fighting monsters. But the villain throughout the series is the powerful mage guy who was defeated generations ago, and he's come back from the not quite deadness, and he's
the Sauron,
possessing people and just creepy, and people you love. and he gets to them before the main characters do, and you're like, ah. And so that series, I think, was just really there was a lot of tension and a decent amount of fighting when the main character was just totally out of her depth, right? She had some magic that she couldn't do much with, and she's facing off against these insanely powerful, just evil, devouring sort of characters. So that was a really great series.
Very cool. Eileen, what about you?
Well, I love young adult books, which is what I write, and also dragons. So I grew up on Pern and Aragon and all those sort of things, but really enjoyed Sarah K. Wilson's Dragon School and Jada Fisher's has a number of series all about dragons. Enjoyed Eric's books and Andy's. But for me, one of my all-time favorites is by someone who's traditionally published, which is Sarah J. Maas's Throne of Glass. And the reason I love it is she has so many players in different places, a lot of action, a young assassin who has so many different layers, and her character unfolds with all these different roles and all the different characters. I just love multi point of view, big sprawling plots that finally in the end, in the last book, everything ties up and you go, of course it had to happen like that. Of course that thing comes up. And sort of that's what I try to do in my books too. So I guess I enjoy that sort of big sprawling world with a lot of different people in a lot of different places and lots of cool. It's not just the fight scenes, it's all the tension throughout the book and the character development and seeing what happens to people. So yeah, that's what I enjoy.
Very cool. Well, you know what? That's our time. Thank you guys so much for hanging out with me, talking action. It's been awesome. To all the people who took the time to watch the video, thank you. Hopefully we'll be back next month with another roundtable discussion. Maybe we'll do live readings. Who knows what we're going to do? We're going to have fun exploring this. Thank you guys so much. Have a great afternoon or morning or whatever time it is for you.
Thanks.
Goodbye.
Bye.